It's really a pleasure to be here. So today we're going to talk about how AI is going to impact music making. So first of all, we're going to look into like a number of different topics, but mainly at the end, I want to give you 3 takeaway lessons that hopefully you can use to navigate this massive thing that is the music AI revolution that we are all living. But before we get into it, just like super quickly, a couple of words about myself. So at a core, I'm a music AI engineer. I'm the director of the Sound of AI. And as David said, this is the largest community and environment on music AI online. We do a lot of like music AI consulting, music AI recruitment services, this kind of stuff. But we are also running currently the Sound of AI Accelerator. That's a startup accelerator that has a batch of 10 music and audio AI startups that are sort of like pushing the envelope in the space. I founded in the past a music AI startup called Melodrive that was doing generative music before it was like all the buzz. And I have a PhD in music AI, and I have a double background as a classically trained musician and programmer. Now, let's move into it. Well, over the last 15 years, that's basically like the time that I've spent in this space. I've never seen so much hype as I've seen lately in the last few months around music AI. And the reason is that a number of different things like are happening in the space that are like quite crazy. Like, for example, I'm sure like some of you may have seen this piece of news. So somebody released a track called Heart on My Sleeve with the peculiarity that the vocals were fake Drake vocals and fake The Weeknd vocals generated with AI. This piece of music became a hit, more or less, like overnight, garnering millions of views on TikTok and other social platforms. But this is by no means an isolated case. And indeed, we have this other example, which I think like is super cool. So there's Alti Music, this sort of like rap group that released this track, and this track is all about hip hop, but with fake AI Jay-Z verses. Let's listen to some of this super quick.
Yeah, you tell the young they can never become what they aspire to. Born in a cell with no one who can inspire you.
Your highs are was never as high as those that lie to you.
Pretending that they live in the sky, lying behind your roof.
Shooting holes up at your ceiling, trying to find the proof.
Okay, so here you hear it, and as you can see, it's quite uncanny, the quality of those verses, like by fake Jay-Z or Jay-Z AI. Well, of course, as you can imagine, all of this has sparked like a huge debate, and it hasn't gone unnoticed by larger players, like, for example, Universal Music, that issued this statement that reads as follows. Training of generative AI using our artists' music begs the question as to which side of history all stakeholders in the music ecosystem want to be on. The side of artists, fans, and human creative expression, or on the side of deepfakes, fraud, and denying artists their due compensation. Universal took this stance. They went to DSPs like Spotify and Amazon or like Apple Music, and they said, hey, folks, you know what? Well, you can't use our catalog for training generative AIs, and also just like stop playing generative AI music like on your services. So basically, like they were like quite strong against AI. Now, I have a few issues with this statement, and some of this like we'll see during this presentation. But the main one that I have is the fact that I think, in a sense, this statement goes against reality. There's a disconnect between a reality and this statement. And what is reality? Well, reality is that we are probably living, and we're seeing the start of a new music revolution, what I call the music AI revolution. And the point is that AI is here to stay, and it's going to spread like wildfire. So the problem that I have with the stance of Universal Music here is that it's as if like they were standing in front of this huge incoming wave, stretching their arms with the hope of halting this formidable force. But as we know, this usually doesn't work in with technological revolutions. And I can give you like a few examples. And I'm sure like you may remember, or at least like some of you who are like a little bit older like me may remember like this company very well, Nokia. By the way, like this was like my first mobile phone when I was a teenager during the 2000s. Well, the point is that during 2007, Nokia was the top dog in the phone market, the global phone market. They had more than 50% of the market share. But then in a matter of a few years, 5 years, they went down to less than 5% market share. So what happened here? Well, what happened is the release of the iPhone. So all of a sudden, we have a completely different concept of the mobile phone. We no longer use the mobile phone only to communicate, but also to surf the internet, to check our bank account, or just like to buy stuff at the time on eBay. And Nokia failed to understand this technological revolution, and they took a huge blow to their market share. And this is another company that did something similar. So Kodak was all the rage during the 90s. And indeed, in 1996, they had 2/3 of the global camera market share. But by 2012, they filed for bankruptcy. So what happened in between then? Well, it happened something very important, that is like the digital camera revolution. The digital camera were all the rage by the end of the 90s. And once again, Kodak failed to adapt. And so, as you can see, there's a clear pattern here. And this is the first takeaway lesson that I would like to share with you folks. Well, and it is, those who don't adapt die. And that is true for Nokia. It is definitely true for Kodak, but it is also true for music players like record labels, publishers, and even music creators. Now, what I suggest is, rather than having this approach where we think of change as inherently bad, we should think of change as a potential opportunity that's out there. And this means that rather than standing still in front of this huge incoming wave, we should try to ride it and take advantage of it. And there's an artist who I think is doing a tremendous job with this type of approach. She's Grimes, an independent artist. And after all the craze regarding like this deep fake vocals and stuff like that, on the 24th of April, she published this tweet that reads as follows: "I'll split 50% royalties on any successful AI-generated song that uses my voice. Same deal as I would with any artist I collaborate with. Feel free to use my voice without penalty." Now, you know what happened after she published this tweet? Well, a lot of Grimes AI tracks started to emerge, and some of these went more or less viral, and some were actually quite good, like this one, for example. Let's listen. Yeah, you see the point. So overall, the quality like of these vocals like is quite stunning, and at the same time, the quality of the track is actually like quite good for being like fun-driven track. And the point that I want to make here is that Grimes is sort of taking advantage of this music AI revolution and trying to ride this incoming huge wave. And indeed, through her business approach, she suggests like a kind of revolution from the typical business model that artists have, like to reach out to their fans, which is like the typical thing where an artist goes through a record label that acts as a gateway between him or herself and the fans. And all of a sudden, she can create a bidirectional relationship directly with her fans. And she can take advantage of this AI revolution twice. First, she's going to get a revenue split on whatever music is created with fake or deep fake Grimes vocals. But at the same time, she's also has her brand raised by quite a lot, because her music, her voice actually, is going to be heard by a lot of people because of these thousands of tracks released onto the market. So up until now, we've seen a possibility of taking advantage of artificial intelligence within the music space, and especially like on the business side. But what about other ways of taking advantage of AI? And so I think like there are a couple of ways here. So first of all, it's to integrate music AI tools in your workflow as a producer or as a composer. The other approach is that of basically having access to new music paradigms that are only possible thanks to AI. And we're going to be spending the next 10 minutes talking about these 2 points quite in detail. So let's get started with music AI tools. Well, these tools can have a bunch of different purposes. And one of which, one that I really like, is using an AI for inspiration. So in other words, you think of an AI as a sort of sparring partner with whom you can actually bounce off musical ideas. Let me give you a couple of examples here. So there's this piece of software that I really like, Melody Studio, that's been released by Wave AI. And if you are a composer, songwriter, so what you can do is basically import your lyrics, and then Melody Studio is going to use AI to generate a melody associated with your lyrics, and it can also suggest some chord progressions. Does this mean that you're going to be replaced by this piece of software? Well, absolutely not. This is an inspiration tool, so you can take what you like and just reject all the rest. So it's a continuous conversation that you can have with the machine in order to avoid writer block and just like to experiment with new ideas. So this tool is specifically focused on composition, but there are other tools like this one that concern other aspects of music production, like, for example, sound design, the creation of sound. So Google, a few years back, released NSynth, and NSynth is this cool AI-powered synthesizer that allows you to create sounds that are mashups between different instruments. And so NSynth comes also like with a nice piece of hardware. That's the one that you can see there, and we'll see how it works like in a second. But it has like a nice interface, which is sort of like a matrix, where at the vertices you have different instruments, and then it is possible for the user to slide between the instrument to get combinations of sounds. Let's see how that works. Yeah, that's quite cool, isn't it? So with this type of tool, you can get inspired finding new otherworldly sounds. And on the same vein, at the Sound of AI, we developed in an open source research project another neural synthesizer that you can use, for example, to issue vocal statements directly to this machine in order to get new sounds, and also quite crazy sounds. Like, for example, you could ask this synthesizer to give you a Jimi Hendrix guitar with little distortion and a lot of delay and reverb, and that would be generated for you. So as you can see, all of these tools can inspire your creative process, providing both compositional ed, but at the same time, sound design suggestions. Okay, now let's take a look at other possible sort of like uses or purposes for music AI tools. And the one that I also think is very interesting is using these tools to enhance your productivity, to streamline your creative workflow. Google once again released a few years back a suite of audio plugins called Magenta Studio. You can see some of this here. And these can be directly embedded in your Ableton session. Let me give you an example of a couple of this. So Continue does what it says it does. In other words, you have your little nice melody in Ableton, and now all of a sudden Continue can continue your melody in a way that's consistent with whatever like you've already written. Drumify has to do with drums, doesn't it? Well, the point here is that if you have a session, an Ableton session without drums, what Drumify does, it adds a drum set line that is somewhat like coherent with all the other tracks in your session. Again, these tools, AI tools, are not only bound to compositional tasks. For example, there are millions of people, musicians all around the world that are using LANDR to master their tracks. And LANDR, of course, uses a machine learning approach to master your tracks, and the results are actually quite decent. And let me tell you a little story about this company called Juketech. So this was a generative music company focused mainly on music for videos, and they've been acquired. But this story involves a friend of mine who's a music producer who lives in Berlin. And when I was living in Berlin as well, so we had a lot of conversation with this dude, and he told me that he would go to the Juketech website and create like 5, 10, 15 tracks, generate all of them, then find one that actually works well with that particular advertisement, piece of art, and then he would like take that and he would like customize it, personalize it, and give it that human touch. And he told me that by doing that, he would save a ton of time compared to like creating the music for that particular ad from scratch. So as you can see, we can use these music AI tools in order to streamline our creative workflow, both like for like the highest level of the music, like art music, concert music, but also like for functional music for for ads. But there is a final sort of purpose for AI tools that I think is super cool, and that is like collaborating directly with a machine in order to create music together, even in real time. Let me give you a couple of examples here. So here you'll meet Shimon. Shimon is a marimba robo player that is able to understand whatever you play and then improvise with you. Isn't Shimon super good? Okay, but now let's take a look at another example, and I really love this one. It's a human-machine collaboration. This fella here is a beatboxer, and in this track, he's in conversation with an AI that's been trained on his beatboxing tracks. Let's listen to an example here. So you can hear him beatboxing, and after a while, the machine sort of like responded to this first part, as if it was sort of like call response relationship. Cool. So far we've seen that we can take advantage of AI as musicians in terms of integrating AI tools within our creative workflow. But there is also like another possibility here that is the one that probably I favor the most, and that is that AI can allow us to get access to new music paradigms that are only possible because of AI. Let me give you a few examples here once again. So meet Bloom. Bloom is a music mobile app. Specifically, it is a generative music app. You can think of it as a sort of album 2.0 where you have a bunch of tracks, but these tracks are not fixed. The kicker here is that the tracks are going to be sort of interpreted differently every time a user consumes this app. But at the end of the day, the musical script of these tracks remains the same, but it has potentially millions of variations. Let me show you how this works, and in the words of Brian Eno, who was behind the release of Bloom. So this is the type of sound design that you get in Bloom.
The original Bloom was really one piece of art, if you like. It, of course, being generative, makes itself in many millions of variations, but essentially they all fit within one envelope of possibilities.
So if we take this concept of Bloom and we stretch it to its extreme, we can think of a new way of interacting with music fans. And the idea is basically to have personalized artists. And the point that I want to make here is that it would be possible to have personalized tracks for each of your fans. And this obviously is completely impossible right now because a musician, an artist may have like 10,000 fans or millions of fans. So it is impossible to create something that caters specifically to that particular fan. But with AI, you can actually think of doing this so that you have a track that is like a sort of like musical script. And once again, that track is adapted based on the likings and what like a particular listener favors. And so you are going to create a sort of like very intimate relationship with each one of your fans. Another great paradigm that I think can be sort of like unlocked by AI within the music space is that of ever adapting music for interactive media. For example, for virtual reality and games. So we have gamers who spend hundreds of hours in large fantasy games like Skyrim. The problem is that they always get the very same 5 hours, 10 hours of a soundtrack. And after a while, the music, rather than improving the engagement, detracts from it because it becomes boring. It's always the same thing. What if we had an artificial intelligence that could actually read in real time whatever is happening in a game, for example, and then based on the narrative, the visuals, the particular experience of the gamer, provide music that adapts to it? And by that, I mean a musical script, once again, created by a composer that then gets implemented with different instrumentation, with different chord progressions, different levels of dissonances or density in the melody, for example. And this is an incredible opportunity to improve the quality of music for interactive media that right now lags behind, just because it is impossible for a human being to create millions of hours of music in real time. Okay? Cool. Now I just want to draw back your attention to this statement issued by Universal. So in summary, it goes like this. So you're either on the side of artists and human creative expression, or you are on the side of deepfakes and fraud. Well, I think this is a false dichotomy because, as we've seen, these AI tools actually improve human creative expression. And indeed, AI is an augmentation tool. Let me take like a brief detour to demonstrate like this second takeaway lesson. And we start with this abrupt change and this weird image. So what is this? Well, this is the oldest musical instrument that we're aware of. It's a flute that was created 60,000 years ago. So as we see already 60,000 years ago, humans and even Neanderthals were creating tools to express themselves creatively through music. Now, if we take a huge leap ahead in time and say we land at the beginning of the 17th century or during the 17th century, we'll see that another tool was developed or invented. And this tool is the orchestra. And you who are in Mannheim should be like very, very close to the concept of an orchestra, given like the Mannheim school, right, that had the best orchestra all over Europe at the time. So the point that I want to make is that the orchestra is yet another tool. You can think it as a sort of like technological tool that improved the possibility, augmented the creative possibilities of composers of the time to express themselves creatively. Let's jump ahead another few hundred years and we'll land at the beginning of the 20th century where recording technology was spreading. And again, this is just another tool that musicians could use to improve their reach so that they could be heard by a lot of people without the necessity of them playing live. And already this time, there was some resistance against this technology. So while we take recording technology for granted today, back in the day, it was somewhat controversial. Meet, for example, Sergiu Celibidache. This is like my sort of like all-time favorite conductor. He was born in 1912, and he thought that sound can only be experienced in the real space. And recording technology is inherently bad for music. How silly does that sound today? So if we jump ahead a few dozen years, we'll see that the same thing happened also during the digital music revolution at the end of the 80s, when we had the appearance of digital audio workstations. There were producers and musicians who thought, well, music is done, that's it. Well, in reality, what happened is that the possibility were opened so that millions of people all over the world could actually create music from their bedrooms. And this is a fantastic thing. This was another tool that improved, augmented creativity for more musicians. So you probably can get like the point where I'm getting at. And the point is that the history of music is a history of tools. We just create new technology to augment ourselves creatively. And I believe that AI is just another augmentation tool. Is it sophisticated? Is it somewhat really scary because like it's a complex thing? Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, it is only an augmentation tool. Okay, so far we've talked about how music, well, can be impacted, or how musicians, professional musicians, can be impacted by AI. What about non-musicians? How can they take advantage of AI? Well, there is a use case that is perfect for that, and it's called text music generation. And it goes like this. So you create your text prompts that describes a piece of music, you pass it through a music model, and this music model is going to generate like the music for you. And there have been a couple of examples, or more of a couple of examples already published. One is Refusion, the other one is Musical.ly, which I think like it's the most advanced one. And Chris, please, like if you can, yeah, perfect. So let's read the prompt for like the first example here. So it reads like this. The main soundtrack of an arcade game, it is fast-paced and upbeat with a catchy electric guitar riff. The music is repetitive and easy to remember. Okay, and it goes on. Let's listen to the results generated by the machine based on this prompt. Okay, quite impressive, isn't it? So the machine basically created everything from scratch, only from that prompt. But for as much as impressive as this like short sample can be, of course, like there are a lot of shortcomings with this model. And can we just like go back to the presentation, Chris? Yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, yeah, next slide. Okay, so as I said, like there are challenges like with this text to music technology. Well, first of all, while these models tend to work quite well at the phrase level, then they don't work so well at a longer term structures, like for example, sections or whole pieces. It feels like the music is in a random walk within like music space. Also, the audio fidelity is not there. There are still artifacts. And finally, there's a really limited creative tool, especially for professional musicians or producers. Because at the end of the day, all you can do is like provide a prompt and get an output. And if you're not okay with the output, you should just go back to create like a new prompt. There's no way of like tweaking knobs in order to edit like the output of your of this model. So regardless of these shortcomings, the point is, and this is the third takeaway lesson, that AI lowers barrier to entry to music making. And this is true especially for non-musicians. And the question I'm sure many of you may have is, will then AI replace musicians, given it is like capable of generating music? Well, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't give you a definite answer here. But for sure, what I can tell you is that probably not. And I think musicians are here to stay. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples to back up like my answer. First one comes from chess. Chess has been solved in 1997, meaning that the world chess champion of the time, Garry Kasparov, has been defeated by a chess engine, a chess AI. So has chess finished? So do we still play chess? Well, chess has never been as popular as is today. We have millions of people playing chess, new people playing chess, and gazillion more watching human chess grandmasters battling each other. So the point that I want to make here is that even for a game that has an objective score metric that tells you I win, I lose, there's still interest in the human aspect. And imagine what happens within the music environment where we have the privilege of not having an objective score to say, yeah, this AI is definitely better at composing music than this human being. And another example comes from photography. Smartphones and Instagram lowered the barrier to entry to photography. So now you have millions of users who can take pictures and then share their work, their creative work, and improve it using AI-powered filters on Instagram. Has this new thing replaced photographers? I mean, professional photographers? Absolutely not. There's space for both of them because they address two different parts of the market. On the bottom side, you have millions of people who have fun and express their creativity and are helped by AI. And on the top side, the market is served by professional photographers. So let me give you a quick look at what I think is going to happen in the future during this music AI revolution. Well, I just want to reiterate that AI adoption will be unstoppable. The genie of AI in music is out of the box. It is impossible to contain it. So we should embrace it rather than reject it. So first of all, I think in a few years, in the larger market, the bottom side of the music market, we're going to see AI generative tools on social media networks like TikTok or Instagram that will allow people to create music easily and personalized music for their reels or for their stories. But on the higher side of the market, AI will probably foster new music paradigms, as we've seen, personalized artists or ever-changing music for interactive media like VR or video games. And AI will also foster new business models. And the Grimes example with the idea of the revenue split is just like an early example of what's to come. And finally, as always, in technological revolution, there are going to be winners and losers. Winners are going to be those recording labels, those music creators and publishers who will embrace AI. Losers are going to be those who will resist it. So I want to leave you with some advice, especially like for music creators, but not only like for music creators, on how to navigate this crazy music AI revolution. Well, first of all, try to observe and learn and absorb as much as you can about the space. This doesn't mean becoming a music AI expert, but you should know what are these models, how they work on a high level, what are their strengths and their weaknesses. Then try to experiment with music AI tools and even try to collaborate with some music AI engineers, because this will give you a vantage point to understand how to utilize AI in the best way possible. And finally, and most importantly, don't be Nokia, adapt. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. So here you have my contacts in case you want to reach out to me.
Many thanks, Valerio, for your keynote. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Perfect. First of all, I didn't mention in the beginning, we have some technical issues with Valerio's video, but we can hear him. He can hear us very well. So we also have time for some questions, and I'm sure there might be a few. There are also people from labels in this room, obviously, and music artists who might have a few questions. Just raise your hand and then we will... okay. You afterwards? Okay, yeah.
Hi, thanks very much for letting me ask a question. I have a question concerning like the individuality of like producing music yourself as an artist, because I think with AI, it's going to get really hard to not be kind of generative, like in terms of being really individual as an artist. And how do you think, is it gonna, how individual do you have to be, and what are the kind of aspects, or how can you as an artist be as individual as possible to kind of not be challenged by AI? Or do you have any tips for that, maybe advice?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. And I think this is actually a concern, right? Because the moment we train AI on a large catalog, then the risk is that everyone's going to get like more or less like the same music, right? But the point is of not using like AI as an end-to-end tool, but rather as a music creator, like a top-end like musician and music producer. So what you want to do is to use it like for inspiration, getting ideas, bouncing off ideas, and then molding those ideas into your creative process. So that machine shouldn't like substitute you, shouldn't replace it, should just like give you some tools that to work with. And it's a little bit like the same thing like that has happened like with samples and loops. So you can take like the samples and loops, like for example from Splice, but then you have to make them your own so that you're going to sound very individual and not generic. And at the same time, there are ways you can use like to avoid like this issue. Like for example, there probably are going to be like ways down the line for easily like training models on your music as well, so that the machine is going to sort of like recognize like what is you and coming like closer like to your preferences and suggest you like things like that are closer like to your creative approach. And so in that respect, I think like that, of course, this is a concern. Individuality is a concern, but as with any tool that allows like mass production in a sense, you have to have that extra level of care in making it like specific by injecting your creative sort of like thinking and process on top of it.
I was also thinking.
I'm sorry, but
yeah.
there are other people who want to have a question, so I have to cut you. I'm very sorry about that. We want to hear more questions from different people, and here in the front.
Hi, Valerio. I have a rather technical question for you. Obviously AIs don't listen to music the way that we hear music. Is there some kind of a best practice as to training AIs or neural network on audio and music data? For example, right now I could think of perhaps turning the audio to spectrograms and then training it like that, but I'm honestly not sure. So that's my question.
Oh yeah, this is a good question, but it is a very vast question because you're basically asking like, how do we do generative music, right? And there are like, a bunch of like different ways. So what you said is definitely true. So you can use like a spectrogram-based approach. So basically you take a wave file, then you transform it into a spectrogram that has information about energy distributed like into like different across like different frequencies like in time, and use that to generate new spectrograms, and then use a sort of like vocoder like to move like from or decoder like to move like from those like spectrograms directly to waveforms once again. But there are also other processes, like for example using directly waveforms. It is like more costly, but it tends to give like better results like some time, especially like in terms of like the overall quality of the audio. But there are also like other approaches as well, like for example MusicLM, that for me like at this point like is the best example of generative text to music generation at least. So what they do is like they take a piece of music, a waveform, and then they compress it into like a code that's unique like to like a certain model that is used like to distill like all the information of a waveform and make it like really smaller and use that. So it's an equivalent of a spectrogram, but it is a whole model trained on distilling like information from music, and they generate like music there, and then they use a decoder for moving like from this slimmer representation of music like to something to the whole waveform. Now the point is like that this is only like one way of doing this, so through audio, but the approach that I think probably is the best at this point is symbolic based. So rather than going like with audio directly, you can go through like MIDI notes or music XML, this kind of stuff. Of course, you're not going to get like the production, but for all of those tools for inspiration and bouncing off ideas, this is great because then you're going to get like directly a score that you can edit, and usually like that works better in terms of the quality of the composition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Valerio. We have a third question here on the right side.
Thanks, Valerio. My question is more from the business side. In the case of Grimes, when people used her voice to create new content, how was it possible? I mean, she offered 50% of her royalties. How was it even possible to manage to monitor this, to report this, to have any control of her their income? How was it monetized, or do you know what happened there, or how a possible business model is for such cases, like using, I don't know, Jay-Z's voice or Eminem's voice and releasing music? Because I think content ID systems like YouTube can't make the difference if they recognize a voice, if it's something recorded or something new. I don't know. It's very many questions in this.
Oh yeah, I think this is a terrific question actually. And no, there isn't a solution there, right? There is this opportunity, but there isn't a solution. So I would assume that probably Grimes will check like things that get a little bit more traction, right? And then just like monetize on those like that get like some press and this kind of stuff. But is this a sustainable approach? Of course not, right? But we are really like at the dawn of this revolution. So what I'm assuming will happen is that we're going to have like new systems in place to keep track of this content. Okay, but are those frameworks already in place? No, absolutely not. So this is something, this is like a sort of like gap in the market. And the moment like AI synthesized voice is going to become widespread more than it already is, like to a certain extent. And that will happen when the models will be easier to use with a user-friendly kind of like UI, if you will. At that point, there will be a need for a system or a series of systems that actually track the voice, the AI voice, like of these artists, like used across the whole network, in a sense, on TikTok, on YouTube, or on Spotify. Right, but this is not sold, and this is something. This is actually like a great like startup idea, I believe.
Okay, many thanks, and we have time for one last question somewhere here in the middle. All right.
Hi, I'm Joseph. Thank you for the inspiring talk. This question relates to the first question about individuality, and it's like when you're co-composing with these AI tools. How do you make sure you always keep questioning your own aesthetic stance and ideals instead of just confirming your own identity or even some collective aesthetic vision of what's supposed to be harmonious or beautiful?
Oh, nice question. Nice question. So I think there is like that risk there, and it's a little bit like the same risk that we have today with recommender systems. Like for example, on Spotify, where at the end of the day, you end up like in your music bubble and you tend to remain there, right? And you tend to listen more of the same all the time. And so the risk can be really the same with composition. But at the same time, of course, like this comes like from a personal attitude, like for sure, like to try to experiment like different stuff. But I can tell you that it is also possible to use these models like to go out of your bubble, because of course like these models will be trained like on so much like data, like so much music that goes beyond like your like music space in a sense, that you can challenge yourself like by asking them like to go like into a direction that are unexpected for your creative workflow, and then perhaps like take inspiration from some of that. Of course, like rejecting the things like that you don't like, and then perhaps like accepting like ideas and suggestions like that are more in line with your aesthetic, but perhaps it's just like a little bit outside of it, so you can be challenged in that way. And I'm going to give you an example here. So there is like one fellow that is like very famous in the generative music community. And so this guy like built he's a composer in the US. He was also like a music professor at a university. And so at some point, like he had like this writer block and he couldn't just like write music, and he wanted to experiment new stuff. So what he did was like basically like building a whole generative music system from scratch. I think it was back in the late 80s or like early 90s, something like that. And he used that as a way of like getting out of writer block, and at the same time to experiment like with new ideas which were like outside of his bubble. So as you can see, of course, like you can use like these machines to sort of reinforce your aesthetics in a sense, but if you're open enough, there's definitely like leeway to experiment with new things.
All right. I would say we give a warm round of applause to Valerio once more.